John, it's wonderful to meet you. Thank you so much for taking a minute out today.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, delving into the special needs world, I remember when the pandemic happened, my son was in middle school. We had just moved. He loves baseball and he loves school. And I didn't even know how to broach it when it happened. It was just a shock in March. So I'm curious, how did you make it through that time period, and how did it change the way that you view and live life now in 2025?
Well, let me tell you, that was an extremely profound time for me for several reasons. So for me personally, what was going on is that so I'm actually divorced from my son's mom. I'm currently remarried, but I'm divorced from her. We separated at the end of 2019, and our divorce was actually finalized in late April of 2020. So just when COVID was kind of rearing up. So I was dealing with going through a divorce, becoming a single parent to my child with a disability. I was also dealing with transitioning my mother, who was experiencing the onset of dementia, into assisted living. And I'm an only child, so I really didn't have a lot of help with that. So I found myself juggling several things, several balls in the air at
Wow.
once. And the pandemic was bad enough, right? I mean, legitimately, I remember how scared I was when, the news just first started blowing up everywhere and not really knowing what this was going to be. But then it was the reality that, again, we got divorced in April. In March, I moved out, and I got my own apartment. So I had just settled in maybe a couple of weeks before everything started to shut down. And so it was this idea that, okay, I need to navigate the finalization of this divorce, but I also need to navigate being a single parent for the first time. And when you have a child with a severe enough disability as my son Chris does, he's severely autistic and nonverbal. He's not going to understand the fact that all of a sudden all of his favorite restaurants are closed, all of his favorite places to go are closed. Oh no, what do? We can only go for walks outside so many times. Not that he doesn't love that, but it was going to be a unique challenge. So what actually came up for me at this time was I developed something I call my three C's. Okay. Using my former teacher brain, we always think in these terms of, acronyms and things. So for me, the three C's were communication, coordination, and compassion. And this came about because as I was starting to navigate this world of COVID, divorce, single parenting, I kind of came up with just an approach in terms of how was I going to engage life, right? Because all of this was very new and it was very raw. So, when I speak about communication, for example, and I just mentioned about how when COVID hit, everything started to shut down and oh no, what do we do? I remember in Illinois, at least, the day before the governor came out, or at least I should say, it was a Sunday, and the next day, Monday, was the day that the state was going to shut down everything in terms of restaurants, bars, cafes, etc. The governor came out on the radio and I was literally in the car dropping my son off at his mom's house. And as I'm pulling away, I'm hearing this news report that, as of tomorrow morning, all this is shut down, can't enter, can't do whatever. So my first reaction is she's got to know this because what is she going to do, right? So I get on the phone as I'm driving, put it on the Bluetooth and hey, I just got this thing on the radio, just a heads up, if we need to work together, let's work together kind of a thing. And that kind of blossomed in terms of that attitude of communicating with my ex, right? Because the fact is that whether or not I wanted the divorce, which I didn't, regardless of how everything was playing out, at the end of the day, we had to work as a team for the sake of our son. So communication was key. And certainly when you're dealing with any divorce situation in parenting, but when you put disability on top and now this pandemic on top. So communication was key. And then coordination, right? So let's make a plan. Let's not just share the information. Let's figure out what we're going to do. One of the things that I learned actually in my first marriage was the importance of having a calendar, not just for, when, the kid's got to go to the doctor or therapy or wherever he's going, but let's have a calendar for self-care. Let's have a calendar for date nights. Let's insulate ourselves and let's, kind of build a calendar around the things that are important that we value in the family and in the marriage. So likewise, coordination now, okay, now we're divorced, we're separated, single parent. But again, that's where you need to coordinate even more, right? Because obviously there are going to be things on her calendar I'm not privy to, vice versa. And we don't want to punish our child indirectly for that if there's a mix up or a miscommunication. So let's coordinate, let's work together, let's support each other. Do you need me to take him a little bit extra because something is going on? Again, the world was crazy for all of us. She was actually, I was working in the nonprofit world at the time, but she was a teacher and still is. So again, teachers had it really hard because you're now switching to all virtual learning. And so that was, its own mess. So that coordination aspect was key. But the last one and the one that I really lean into is compassion. And here's where I go with that. Because at the end of the day, I was dealing with a lot of raw emotions still. I was dealing still with a lot of heartache, heartbreak, and just confusion over all of this loss and all of this change. And everywhere I went, personally, for me, there was, it was like, when is the next shoe going to drop? Because whether it was my son, the divorce, COVID, my mother, and so I had to remember, look, at the end of the day, we will get to a place where things are normal again. We will get through this, however long it takes. Life will go back to normal at some point. And it was a reminder to me of how did I want to remember myself in terms of how I showed up in the middle of this? Did I want to be a raving lunatic and you don't know what I'm dealing with and how could you do this to me and this is the worst? Or did I actually want to show up as a loving and kind father and someone who could partner with my ex-wife in co-parenting and could step up to these things because I didn't want them, I didn't expect them, but they were real nonetheless. But at the end of the day, I had to think about what that legacy was going to be for me years down the road. Would I be able to look back on it with a sense of pride and feeling like I showed up, I stepped in, and I supported the people that needed me to the way they needed? Or did I want to, just be selfish and make it all about myself? So that was really that compassion piece for me. And those three C's are something that I've talked about in a variety of environments. And I think they apply to a lot of things. But for me, really, that's, what birthed that was being in the middle of all of that crisis at once, but being able to come out of it. And again, saying that I did it as well as I could have.
Well, and you had all of those years being a father of a special needs son to realize to build up to that moment. Because I thought the lead up to COVID, I think as a special needs parent, we're living through COVID all the time.
Yeah, yeah, right, right, exactly. Well, and it's interesting too because one of the things that also hit me really hard when I transitioned into the single parenting thing was the fact that when you have a child like mine, okay, he will never be totally independent with anything, right?
Right.
He still requires help with bathrooming, feeding, dressing. You can't just kind of let him do whatever he wants because you don't know exactly what he's going to do. So, for years, we had a dynamic in our family where it really was kind of a tag team approach. And what I mean by that is, and especially when I talk about using the calendar for like the self-care piece, it was important that, and we learned this the hard way, by the way, it was important for us to understand that we had to replenish our resources internally, right? We had to be in a good place because when we were with him, all bets are off. You are in. It's not like I can randomly just get distracted for a second. You have to be aware of where he's at, what he's doing, how what his needs are, and all of those things. And then when you get overwhelmed, you tag your partner in. You know what? I need a break, or I need a minute, or I need to step away. Now, as a single parent, I didn't have that, right? There was no one to call for help. There was no, release valve or exit plan or anything. It's just me. So in some ways, I would say that I got kind of prepared for it over the years in all of those situations where maybe mom wasn't home or mom, was doing something else and okay, it's on me. So you figure it out. But at the end of the day, you figure it out for a couple hours, 2, 3 hours, and then mom comes home and then you can work together. You don't have that now, right? So really I appreciate those years of kind of allowing myself to prepare for what was down the road. But in the middle of it, I can tell you that one of the hardest things was just that feeling of, I'm doing this by myself now.
Yeah.
And as much as I love my child, you often get concerned that, you're going to run out of those reserves And if you can't replenish, then what kind of a thing? So
Yeah.
it is a real legitimate concern for sure.
I get it. I totally do. So let me ask you this. At the end of the day, if you were to be put in front of a bunch of 12-year-olds in a grade school at career day and someone asked you what you do for a living, what would your answer be?
So I would describe myself as a disability advocate. I like to say that I'm a national disability advocate kind of a thing because at least I've been doing stuff around the country. I actually jokingly refer to myself as the Swiss Army knife of disability advocacy because I do a little bit of everything, right? And so what I would share to them is listen, and I would really start out by talking about my son and my relationship with my son. And yeah, I actually, in my work the last several years, I've actually spoken to a lot of school groups, elementary, high school, college. But when you're dealing with, let's say, for example, like you said, like the middle school age, where they can relate to some of these things, but not really yet. It really goes back into, hey, you know what? I'm a parent of a child with a disability, and here's the story that I usually tell, and I say this to most groups because I just like to give them this perspective. When I talk about my son, I say, look, my son is 17. Now, currently, he actually lives, I didn't mention this, but currently he actually lives at a residential facility in Wichita. And he's basically just finishing up high school there. But when he lived here in the Chicago area, he was a busy guy. He did all of these things at school. He did these things after school, therapies, Special Olympics, special needs, karate, horseback riding, swim therapy, you name it, he was doing something, right? And that's great. But guess what? He also didn't have any friends. Now you kind of scratch your head, and especially for someone at that age, they might say, well, wait a minute, what do you mean he doesn't have any friends? Didn't you just say he was involved in all this stuff? I'm like, yeah, he was. But here's the thing, he has severe autism and he doesn't communicate. He doesn't have intentional relationships. He has default friends at school or, in the neighborhood kind of a thing, whatever people we just know. He doesn't have anybody calling him up saying, hey, what are you doing this weekend? Hey, do you want to go, you want to play video games? You want to go shoot hoops? You want to do this? He will probably never have that, right? Because of the severity of the disability. So I use that point as a springboard to have the conversation of, hey, listen, think about in your own experience, in your own communities. Maybe you have disability in your family, or maybe you don't, but guess what? And this is, I don't like to give, the younger guys too much in terms of data or numbers, but again, it's perspective building. It's the fact that people with disabilities are the largest minority in the world now. And that's defined by World Health Organization. It's over 1 billion people. It's 1 in 4 in the US with a disability. There are definitely people in your schools, communities, churches, wherever that identify with disability, families that have kids with disability, maybe your own age, maybe younger or older. Have you ever thought about engaging with them? Have you ever thought about being a friend? Have you ever thought about doing some kind of like a mentoring or a peer mentoring thing, right? Because the reality is that people like my son, who, by the way, is an only child, and I'm an only child, and his biological mom is an only child, at some point, everybody that he knows is going to be gone. He won't have siblings there. He won't have people stepping into his life that's like extended family and such. Who's going to be his community, right? That's where you have an opportunity to do that, right? And so when I speak to whether it's again student groups, adult groups, I speak to a lot of churches as well. And again, we talk about this idea that it's an obligation and an opportunity, right? We do have an obligation to support individuals like my son and families like us, but it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for us to develop meaningful relationships that can have a long-term impact on someone like my son and can also give back to you in ways maybe you never expected.
So when Miles was born in '04, I remember there was the number on the spectrum or autism specifically was something like one in like, I don't even know, it was in the hundreds. And then it
Mhm.
got to the point now where it's like one in, like you said, there's 1 in 4 with a disability. But I think even on the spectrum, it's at least 1 in 5, 1 in 10, something like that. So from your perspective, with all of this time, how old is your son?
17.
Okay, so Miles is 20. So we've been at this about the same amount of time. Do you feel like what we're being told about autism and what we're being given for resources and what we're being given for support is enough? That it's where it should be, that it's ramped up over time in his lifetime?
So yeah, that's a very sticky conversation.
It is.
And I have definitely had it. And you know what? I will honestly tell you, My opinion has probably changed a little bit over the years, but here's what I come back to. Um, so my son, when he was first born, we didn't know what it was, and in fact, when he was first diagnosed by the neuropsych, it wasn't even autism. It was pervasive developmental disorder, which doesn't even exist anymore. Now it's just ASD. It's just all under the spectrum. Um, Most families and most parents, when they're young, get bombarded with a lot of information. And the information comes from many places, some good, some not so good. We definitely looked at a lot of the research about vaccines, and that's something that, definitely comes up, and certainly now it's coming up a lot with the current administration. Um, and what I would tell you is this: my son, was fully vaccinated until about the age of 5, and then we said, you know what? It went through consultations with his pediatrician, who said, he can probably get by without the boosters, and the natural immunity takes over. And we said, okay, you know what? We don't know if anything is there, but let's just not push it. And I think we're good where we're at. Now, the thing though is this: would I ever suggest to someone that vaccines cause autism? No. Right. And I'll tell you why. Because, we've had friends over the years where, they've had twin boys, right? Literally twins. One has severe autism, one's perfectly normal. Both were on the same schedule, both exposed to the same things. And it's even interesting too. And I do like to bring this up when we're talking about this subject. I was on a podcast a few years ago with a woman who knew Jenny McCarthy and actually had Jenny on her podcast. And we actually talked about this because Jenny in recent years, although she was a staunch advocate, for, dialing it back with the vaccines and, there's something here and it's the issue. Jenny's actually come out and walked that back, publicly and said, well, I really don't think that had as much to do with it, or at least not as much as she was saying. So it's interesting, that on the one hand, she's even admitted, you know what, maybe I was going out a little bit on a limb here, but here is the one thing that I will say. Um, when our son was very young, his mom, my ex-wife, read one of Jenny's books, and it was basically, and I don't recall the title, but it was the book about, when she was parenting her child with autism and just kind of all those ups and downs. And, there's a part of that book where she literally describes that, whatever was going on with him, he was hospitalized and he was actually near death. For whatever was going on. Again, I don't necessarily recall, but the visceral way that she communicated and shared the experience of hanging on to her son and screaming for him to live, in a hospital setting, no parent wants that experience. And so what I remind people, because it's such a polarizing issue, and what I tell people is this: look, until you've been a parent in that situation, where you are literally clutching your child and hoping that they just make it through the night. You can't judge someone for at least asking a question. Hey, have we looked at this, right? And so for me, where I go to is I say, okay, look, I'm not anti-science, but I think we could be doing more with the science, right? So I think there are more answers there maybe that we don't have yet. I think we need to lean into it. And I think if anything, we need to have a better understanding of either in terms of a prenatal approach, or when a child is very young, looking at, hey, could there be some markers or issues for a particular vaccine at a particular time in the schedule or whatever. And we have some of that, but it's really not comprehensive. And so again, we don't want to assume that, vaccines are causing anything,
Right.
but we also know that everyone reacts to stuff differently. And I will just add this. We recently discovered that our own son actually has a chromosomal disorder, which we hadn't identified before. It was through genetic testing that we had recently done in the last year. And turns out that he's missing a chromosome that actually was not the result of mom or dad or anything we did. It actually happened in utero, and the chromosome just did one of those poof things. So the chromosome just went away. Nothing we did, not from either family line. So could we even, attempt to blame a vaccine for that? Probably not, right? But at the same time, we want to be sensitive to families' experiences and know, hey, listen, let's have empathy for what they're experiencing and understanding that at the very least, you can't fault someone for asking a question or just wanting more information.
I get it. My son, technically, when you boil it down, he's on the spectrum. He has developmental delays. He had one extra long piece of genetic material on his 15th chromosome. That's it. They ruled everything out. No autism. The minute somebody came in the home and we had first steps, they immediately looked up within 30 seconds and said, "This, your son does not have autism." Angelman's, Downs, all of it. None of it was conclusive. To this day, there's no real diagnosis other than impulse control and obviously sensory things, but it's still not clinically diagnosed. So it's interesting in a very peculiar way how all of these things will fall into certain categories like this with chromosomal issues, and hopefully at some point they can herd all of these chromosomes that this is happening on and have a better way of saying this is what's going on, this is what you can do, this is just kind of have a laundry list of all of that. That would be nice, and I think it's going to be a long time, but I think we're going to get to that point. And I think it's going to happen under another administration that will put money to it and will put resources to it because I don't feel like it's going to happen in this. It's just definitely not a part of their plan with all the cutbacks and everything that's happening, kind of the general nature of things, which is heartbreaking. And it's more heartbreaking with this administration and as I think about it as to what the future is going to be because I think about of all the other things that are happening, like what's hopefully the special needs kids will be protected. And I think there's angels naturally around them in the world, however you believe or really believe that they're there to protect them. And I think there's a real community. I don't know how you felt in public, but I think when people figure out that Miles is on the spectrum, there's an extra level of vigilance that goes into people. But that's met with kindness, and it really comforts me.
Yeah, and that is huge for me actually, because what I'll tell you is this. We never really had any bad experiences in public in terms of, him bullied or picked on or anything. We had a couple random things happen, but that's to be expected.
Yeah.
But what I say is this, right? And if when people ask me, okay, John, we get you have a child with a disability that motivates you, but at the end of the day, why are you really doing this? What's your real game here? And for me, it's this. Again, going back to that idea that my son is an only child, and someday he's not going to have anybody left.
Yeah.
I need the world to be a better place for
Uh-huh.
him when all of us are gone, right? I can't literally leave this mortal coil until I know that he is at least in a world where he's going to be respected, where he's going to be valued for who he is, just as a person, and where he's going to have people around him that are loving and caring enough, kind of a thing, right? And again, this is the heartache that goes into being a parent like ours, because as someone once put it to me, you can pay someone to care for your child, but you can't pay someone to love them, right?
Hmm.
And the biggest fear is at some point when all of us are gone, okay, wherever he's living, whatever care he's getting, I'm not going to be the one to literally have the oversight to go check in on, is this good or is
I
this
know.
bad or is this working out? And to what level or degree of trust can I have, right? And that's why you see so many families like ours where the parents might be in their 60s, 70s, 80s and may have health issues themselves. And those kids with disabilities are still living with them as adults
Yep.
because the parents are saying, you know what, they'd get better care with me. And I get that.
Yep.
I think it also is a slippery slope, and I think we all need to make a plan for the inevitable. But I get what that is, because again, there is such a fear of what is the world going to be? It's good. It's definitely better than when I was a kid and when we were kids, for sure. What is it going to be in 30, 40, 50 years? That I don't know. And again, that's where the real fear comes into play.
So let's tap into something positive. Being a parent of a special needs son has opened me up to things that I never thought that I would ever realize about being alive on this planet. And, Miles at the end of the day is probably my hero. He has to work harder than anyone else, but it's hard. Um, what have you figured out? What's the magic? What's the magic of your son? What's the magic? It's hard. I get it. I hear everything, probably in a way that many people may not with what you said. But there are silver linings. There are things that we've been given as gifts because of our children. What is it for you?
So my son, first of all, is the happiest guy you'll ever meet.
Yep.
He really is. He is just natural joy. He definitely has had some issues, when he first, got into, puberty and adolescence, and we had to tweak some meds and this kind of thing. But for the most part, he's the sweetest guy. He is just a joy to be around, and again, his visceral joy for life and for the simplest things. I mean, when he was very young, the kid moved like Tasmanian devil. He
Yeah.
never stopped, and and of course he had also some motor issues and things, so you always had to watch out for. He'd book it down the street and then all of a sudden fall,
Yeah.
face down because he
Yeah.
lost his footing, and oh no. But now, he's slowed down as he's gotten a little bit older, but he still just loves going places. Just put him in a car, and he's all smiles. He doesn't
Yeah.
care where he's going. You just, hey, we're going somewhere. Or let's go for a walk, or let's check this out. He just has a genuine joy for life, right? And one of the things I talk about too is because I work a lot with families, but specifically with dads. Dads, special needs dads are kind of my niche. And one of the things that I hear from dads all the time is that a lot of them have a very hard time because men are fixers, and you have a child, especially a male child, right?
Yeah.
And you have dreams and goals and visions for that male child. You're gonna play travel sports, we're gonna go hunt, fish, whatever your thing is, right? We're gonna do all this stuff. And now maybe you can't. But what I remind people of is, look, that's still your child. You may not have the experience that you thought you would, but you can still have an experience. So, for example, my son likes watching sports on TV, especially like football and basketball stuff that
Yeah.
moves
My,
quickly.
yeah.
And we get into that, and we cheer and clap. And when I was married to his mom, we used to have a basketball hoop in the driveway, and a lot of times we just go out there and shoot hoops, and whether I made it or missed it, he's clapping away, and oh, isn't that awesome, kind of a thing. And again, he can't really shoot. He can kind of pass it. He doesn't have the motor skills for all that, whatever. He's not ever going to play on a school team or whatever, but so what? We're having a moment, we're having an experience. He's happy as long as the ball is going up in the air and clanking against something great. And we still have that experience wherever we go. If we, take a trip, or, we're in the church gym or whatever kind of thing, it's, hey, just bounce the ball around, he's happy. Right. So again, it's a matter of finding that way to connect, because it's still your child, and
Yeah.
you can still have those moments. And what I can tell you is we've had a lot of maybe different memories than I assumed, but you know what? We've had a lot of valuable memories in terms of trips we've done, programs we've done, just different outreaches, whatever it is. There's been plenty of things. But at the end of the day, too, I'll just mention this. Um, my son has also taught me to be a kinder person. He's taught me to have more empathy, and not that I wouldn't call myself a kind person before, but now I'm kind on a whole other level. I'm kind to the point of, you know what, I have a very low tolerance for injustice, I guess you could say, in the world. And if people are hurting, at the very least, I at least want to think I could help them, or what could I do? And sometimes maybe that's just an encouraging word, or someone needs a hug, or whatever. But you know what? It's made me a kind of person to say, you know what? Life is hard. We are all struggling with stuff. And you know what? There are families I know with kids with disabilities that are struggling way more than me, right?
Hmm.
Even, because of what they're dealing with and different medical issues and things. So, I want to have that perspective. But again, that's where I say, you know what? I've learned to kind of go the extra mile in my own life because of what my son has shown me. And again, because of what I would hope the world would show him later.
So my son he's very social, loves to talk to people. He's always been that way. And we got a convenience store up the street from us, and he likes to get a couple lottery tickets. And he walked in today, and they were just they hadn't seen him for like a week. Miles, hey, what's up? Everybody's yelling, what's going on? It's like what you're talking about with this community. I'm always reassured every day whenever I see him go out in public, and I see people that latch onto him, and he has no fear. He goes up to people, and we're out. We play catch and basketball and football all the time outside. He's just like seeing neighbors and people, and can I pet your dog? And there's just this thing where they don't have any fear. And one thing too is that he doesn't get hung up on the things that most people get hung up on, like news headlines, all of these things. He'll have questions, but at the end of the day, there's this level of filtering that's just pure. It's genuine. It's like a child, a young child, and there's something so wonderful about how we all get mired in the muck of being humans on this planet, and then we get to see these beams of light that literally are impenetrable from all of these weird things and surreal natures of being alive. So I totally get that. So I want to ask you on a as a parent and as a human being, of all of the things that you've done and evolved to on this planet at this point in your life, what are you the proudest of?
Well, I would say just, and as cliche as this is going to sound, I would just say being a parent to my son.
Yeah.
Because my relationship with him has gifted me in so many ways. And let me expound on that a little bit. Because when people encounter someone like us, a family like us, or a parent like us, and their first kind of knee-jerk reaction is, oh, you poor thing, and that must be so hard and all this. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? It is hard. It is absolutely hard. But here's the thing. My son's disability has blessed and gifted me in so many ways I'd never imagined.
Hmm.
Because first of all, it made me a better person. It made me a better dad and a better person, number one. Number two, it allowed me to look at the need not only for myself to engage more with community, with other families and dads like me, but then also to give back in ways in terms of building up my own advocacy and the own way and the other ways that I give back and leaning into my creative pursuits, into writing and speaking and doing all of these things, which I never would have done had I not had this experience of raising my child. And then looking at, even beyond all of the different things that I've gotten to do, and again, I've gotten to work with some amazing people. I've gotten to work with, some people who are literally kind of celebrities in this world. I've gotten to, just be a part of some wonderful events and experiences and things. But at the end of the day, it's also the relationships. It's the relationships I've made. I have made some very good friendships with people locally and around the country. I never would have if I wasn't in this world. And again, some of those, have a little bit more of a professional bent, but some of them are just, hey, you know what? I met a great special needs dad years ago. He and I became friends. He was at my wedding. His two sons who have disabilities but are a little higher functioning would ask, hey, is John and Chris around? Maybe we can see him this weekend, kind of thing. It's those relationships. That's the real fruit of this. And so I think about, wow, look at all of the people I never would have encountered.
Yeah.
Whoever they are and wherever they are on the spectrum of life, famous, non-famous, infamous, whatever you want to say. The fact is that if I didn't have this journey, none of that would have happened. And I would probably be remiss. I will just add one last thing, because one other thing that Chris's disability did is lead me to my faith in Christ, because I am a Christian because of his disability, because of the early struggles that we had and I specifically had. I found that what I needed could only be found there.
Yeah.
And it's actually because of that. And so when people ask me, is it what's the greatest gift? Well, it's everything my son gave me, but my son also gave me that too. Because without that, I wouldn't have had, I wouldn't have had the spiritual peace that I do. And quite honestly, if I didn't have that spiritual peace when I needed it, I have no idea how the rest of my life would have turned out, quite literally,
Yeah.
because, that happened at a very dark place in our life. And it was a real struggle for us as a family and also for me individually. So those are all wonderful gifts. But ultimately, if you had to put me in a corner, I would say that was probably the best.
So if anybody wants to tune in to any of your work, writing, podcasts, videos, your mission, any of the good news, good business, where do they go?
Yeah, so I jokingly say just punch me into the Google machine, you'll find me. But I do have a website. It's just my name.com, johnfella.com. I will tell you that I'm busily trying to keep up and getting my friend who's my webmaster to keep up with getting all the content on there. So if you want the newest and freshest content, though, definitely check me out on social media. I have a blog page on Facebook. It's John Special Needs Blog. on Facebook, John Special Needs Blog. I have a personal Facebook as well. You could certainly find me there. I'm on Instagram, John_Fela_1 on Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn, X, all of those other platforms. Just punch my name in, you'll find me and see some of my fresher, newer stuff. I will also plug that I have a couple of books coming out in about the next 6 months. I have a book that's ready to come out, which is actually my memoir and my story of being a special needs dad, where I unpack a lot of what we talked about, but much, much more.
Yeah.
And that's called Faith Like My Father, and that will be coming out again, hopefully in the next month or two. And then I have another book that is not mine, but I contributed to with a name a lot of people might know, which is Temple Grandin. So I have a friend who did a book with Temple Grandin that I also contributed to, and that's actually an interesting book because that's actually a book written for educators and also therapists to provide a first-person perspective on what it's like to either identify as a person with a disability or as a parent of disability. So that I think is going to be a wonderful resource. So excited about that. That should be coming out in the spring. So definitely look for those books. I'll be blasting all those out on my social media as well. But again, I'm welcome and open to chatting with anybody. Feel free to reach out to me. More than happy to connect.
Absolutely. I will put all these links in the show notes. So wonderful to connect, John. Thank you so much. Thanks for taking a minute out. It's always great to talk about it, to get in this world and kind of figure things out and put it out in the public. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Joe.
You bet.